So we can start. Hello, everyone. I'm Ira Ponedельnik from n-ost, and right now we have a series of webinars related to climate, health, and info society and media management. As a part of our project in-depth. So nice to see all of you here. Today we are going to talk about community and monetization, because it was one of the topics that our wonderful media partners asked to talk about. And I'm happy to represent you, Lucas Batt. He is coordinator from Reference, the European Independent Media Circle. So if you have any questions, please write them firstly in the chat, and we will ask them after the presentation from Lucas. And but if you will want to ask questions yourself, you can also do it after the presentation. So Lucas, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, fantastic to be here. If you have any questions throughout my my talk, I've got a presentation. Please just drop them in the chat or actually write them down, and we'll make sure we have time to discuss at the end. It'd be really great if you could drop your name and the organization you're from in the chat, so I get a sense of who's here. I think one of the challenges I had preparing this presentation is sort of knowing that people are at very different stages with their community relationship and with the kind of size of the organization. So I'll bear that in mind. I didn't make any assumptions that anyone knows everything about it. So excuse me if I go through some of the basics. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk, it's a massive topic, how to build, engage and monetize your community, more than we can really cover in 1 hour, I have to say. So I'm going to touch on all bits of these, but do a bit of a deep dive into my former organization, Bristol Cable, as a way of demonstrating how to bring all of these things together and what we did as part of that organization, and hopefully uncover some insights for how you might translate those to yours. But really happy to discuss any topic that comes up or that you'd like to discuss. I'll just find my presentation. Okay, is that all good? You can see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So my background, I worked for the Bristol Cable. It's an independent, community-owned newsroom. It's a local newspaper, a new one, founded about 9 years ago, and I joined shortly after it was founded. That's me over there. This is our AGM, and I really like this photo because I think it really shows the community. This is from one of our annual general meetings, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, where members come together every year to actually make decisions about how we run the newsroom. And I worked in almost every role across this very small collaborative team of about 8 to 10 people. But generally, my personal mission was whatever is needed to make this organization sustainable, I will do it. And so I ended up working mostly on membership and fundraising and general operations. But that's kind of the broad strokes of my experience, or how to engage and involve your community and make that pay for itself. And more recently, last year, I moved to Reference to take my experience of how to make a local newsroom in the UK sustainable to how do we make European independent media sustainable. So this is a network of independent media that we're just growing. We're in the early stages. We have 26 members at the moment, but the idea is to share experience and knowledge within the network. Again, that's me over there. And this is from our meetup in Budapest in November. So to begin with, I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of first question on this, because how do we pay for this is the kind of, I think, the ultimate question about when you talk about engagement and how you sustain your operations. Someone put it really well recently. The problem isn't how to do the journalism, but how to pay for it. And I think community engagement is a really great way of harmonizing the different needs that you want to achieve with your journalism, and getting as many good outcomes as possible. So if you can have a community service, impactful journalism, and pay for it, aligning all of these three things are really, really good as an outcome that you can aim for. Looking beyond, say, how can you monetize it through advertising, etc., which might have an extractive or a negative approach on your community. I think it's really great to look at how to actually have a multiplying effect and benefiting your community. So there's, I think, 3 basic ways in which you can ask your community directly for money rather than sort of monetizing them. You have subscriptions, and you might think, is that a good fit for you if you have exceptionally high quality or highly differentiated journalism, that you have the technological capacity to implement a paywall so that you can actually exclude people who don't have a subscription, and that if you have a strong audience in specific industries or content which is a professional benefit or have particular fans around a certain topic. So there are some considerations why you might want to do subscription. If you want to do donations or crowdfunding, more so you have to think about, is your journalism perceived as a public good? And are there opportunities perhaps for your audience to engage with you, and are you nurturing that relationship with them? And I think more than a subscription, you need to be looking at the relationship as a two-way street with your audience or your community when you're looking at crowdfunding or donations. And it might be that your coverage has a particular community around that as well. So these are other reasons why you might look at a more donation or crowdfunding based model. And if you're looking at membership, I see membership is a sort of the deepest commitment of these. So subscription is maybe a bit more transactional. Donations or crowdfunding might be a little bit more one-off. And a membership is a longer term commitment where the community should be saying, what do you want from me, more than you're asking them what can I give you? And so that's where there are much more transparency around your journalism, much more opportunities for people to participate, much more of a direct relationship with your community. So examples of these, I really like the example of Manchester Mill in the UK at the moment, and I really encourage people to look at them. What the Mill has done really well in building their subscription funnel is have a very simple product. It's all newsletter based, and I think they've built the funnel really nicely in that you get the newsletter for free. I think you get 2 or 3 for free, but to subscribe, you get 2 extra newsletters, so you can try before you buy. But it's also very relationship driven as well. So I think it's blurring the lines between subscription and membership, and maybe is leaning towards membership, where it's all of the content is in the newsletter. They ask questions to their community, and it's very much like there's an identity around it. They call them millers and things like that. So I think it's a really nice example of aligning the kind of the tech, the product. It's through Substack, and it has 5 newsletters, and it has a very simple way to subscribe. And I think those are the things that you need to be looking at when you're trying to decide, are you going to do subscription? Can you do that? How does this product line up with how you publish? How are people engaging with you? And how can they actually subscribe? With donations and crowdfunding, so 2 examples are at Lazzo in Hungary. So they do a lot of crowdfunding by making big asks to fund their journalism. And then there are lots of big newsrooms, such as those in the US, like ProPublica, which also do crowdfunding. And these work really, really well when, as I said before, you do widely recognized public interest journalism that people think is a good thing, it should be supported, but also that there's a big enough community so that or pool of people that you can ask, such that if they chip in just once a year, if they give a one-off contribution, that it's worthwhile to do that. And it's very common with these models to have a sort of end of year fundraiser. So actually with all of these, you might have we want to increase our number of members, we want to increase our number of contributions, we have a target to have a campaign to say we want to get to this level. And I think also, again, with all of these, while it's really nice to have a kind of one-off donation, and also to give that as an option, the best thing you can do is have a recurring contribution to develop that longer-term relationship, not only because it's more reliable, but it also will ultimately give you much more money. But I think it's also important that you look at the kind of the stages of a relationship building with your community. And it's a very big ask. Someone I heard once put it really well, that by asking someone to become a member of your newsroom very early on in their experience of, say, visiting your website, there's a pop-up, become a member. That's like being asked to get married on the first date. And I think it's really sensible to think about the experience of an audience member and how you're communicating about what your newsroom is all about, why you need support, and building up those paths for someone to feel more comfortable with giving money to organizations. Because ultimately, it's really about their ability to trust you and think that your journalism is valuable, that it needs your support, that it needs their support. So it might be that donations is a really good first way to get someone to take out their wallet and take out the credit card and pay you. But then it's really important that you capture their email address so that you can tell them again when you have another fundraising round, or to ask them to become a member ultimately. And then membership, this is, as I said, the kind of deepest form of relationship with your community, where people are a bit more part of your journalism. You expect and need more from them than money. You need their participation, their thoughts, their ideas. And the Bristol Cable and Zetland in Denmark are two examples of that. So when you're looking at building your community, I'm sure all of you already have audiences, so you're not starting from scratch. As within any newsroom or any approach where you're thinking of building product, it's always important to center who is your audience and how are you understanding who they are. Maybe you already have some existing research, or maybe there's some market research that you can draw on. But I like to say it's just pick up the phone to 10 people, 10 of your regular audience members that you can find. It might even be friends or family members who you know are regular readers of your audience, of your platform, to get a sense of who they are, what defines them, what are their sort of needs that your journalism serves. It might be that you have a very broad platform or a very focused one, but as much as possible, it's good to get an idea of, are there certain categories of audience member, and what defines these categories? Are they wealthy? Are they not very wealthy? Are they old? And what is attracting them to your journalism as well? What do they need out of it? So always centering the understanding and needs of your audience is, I think, the first point in when you're looking at building your community. Then if you're going to take that community and then sort of try to define it beyond just saying we have an audience, okay, we have segments within that. But if you want to define a community, it needs to be much stronger than a disparate, set of demographics or set of needs. There needs to be something bringing them together. And I would say you should do that in relation to your journalism. If you're looking to define a community related to your platform, something that you could give a name to, like the millers or cablers, people that might have an identity related to your journalism, or a particular need around it. It's got to have something meaningful beyond sort of, I read the news. It's sort of, no, I believe in this topic, or I'm from this area, and this platform represents me in some way. So taking both your audience's needs or their demographics, what defines them, what defines your journalism, and trying to put those two things together so that your community is built in relation to your journalism, what it offers them, and how they are a part of it, what the community can offer your journalism as well. And then ultimately, yeah, you need to create something that community is willing to pay for or willing to be a part of. You've got to have a good product. And there are lots of ways you can develop these, but a classic product development thing would be do the minimum that you need to get feedback on your initial idea. So is there a way that you could prototype this community, and then how are you monitoring and evaluating what you're learning from that? Is this membership offer, does it have enough exclusive benefits? Is it too expensive, or would people be willing to pay more? Are there other things that we could offer that would make it valuable? So this is a question you should be asking yourself. Who is your community? What are we offering them? And are they willing to pay for it? And then when you have this proposition, you need to build a funnel that will attract them. And there's very classic funnels that you can look at. It's a long established process with audience development. But basically, top of the funnel, how are people finding you? Is it through search? Is it through a newsletter that you're sharing? Is it through flyers in a local community? Is it through Facebook, etc.? And then how are you bringing them through that pathway? So getting them to sign up to your newsletter, build that that loyalty, build that connection, and communicating what you are about, and then at the right time communicating to them what you want them to sign up to ultimately. And then when you get them through the funnel, when you've converted them, you obviously need routines to continue to engage them. And if you are saying they're a community, you need to act like they're a community, not just publish or talk at them, but talk with them. Find ways to involve them in your journalism. And I'm going to talk much more about examples of this. And I think this is a really, I'll talk about membership puzzle a little bit, and I really, really recommend, if you want to do membership, to look at the membership guide by the Membership Puzzle Project. But this is their example of the funnel. But looking at membership, the classic one is on the left-hand side: attract, nurture, convert, engage. But with a membership program rather than a subscription, what's important is that you actually have this other part of it. Is it doesn't end there. You haven't just got them and then you send them journalism. Then you actually can continue to engage them, and this is how you build their loyalty and actually enable them to offer you more in your newsroom, or to your newsroom. That they might advocate for you, they might offer you information, they might recommend you, and there's this harmonious feedback loop that you can have with that community as you deepen the relationship with them by continuing to engage them. So I'm going to talk a bit more about engagement, because there's a lot to talk about on all of these topics, and I thought I'd focus just on engagement. I'm really interested to see what the opportunities are for all of you, and where your kind of main opportunities lie for monetizing that community. I'm going to talk specifically about the cable now, the Bristol cable as an example. But within this field, some have defined it as engaged journalism. It was labeled after we started doing it. But the EJC had a nice definition, which is journalism that puts community engagement, either geographical or topical, at the center of a news organization's ownership, reporting, distribution, impact, and revenue, viewing journalism as a conversation and as a utility that empowers communities. So I think that's an important thing to say, that it's a mindset as well. I think it's a mindset you've got to really buy into, that this community matters, they're real people, and you have a responsibility to them. They're not sort of people who are simply a revenue stream, but people that matter, that you have a responsibility to, and that who can really benefit your organization. So it's a mindset thing to begin with. And why should you do it is obviously the really important question. When you have a million things to do, why should you spend time on this? Is it really worth it? Well, I think, yes, it is. You can tell much better stories through building up a relationship with the community. You become more trusted, so that you can get much more better sources. That's particularly important if you're doing things like investigative journalism. You have people come to you who would never come to you otherwise, if they feel like they can really trust you and trust your journalism, and that there are ways you can they can engage with you, that you're presenting yourself as transparent, it's clear who you are, it's clear how you're funded. These are really important foundational things, but will enable you to do better journalism. You get perspectives of your community. They can offer you their ideas, they can offer you their experiences, and these are all things that you can use in your journalism, but you can also use it to improve your journalism and to improve the products that you're publishing. So you can ask for people's priorities. Should we do this kind of journalism, this kind of story? What's your feedback on this? Is this working for you? And you can tell kind of stories that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So there's some examples of crowdsourcing, like Corrective's Crowd Newsroom. We've done it in the cable as well, where if you have 300 or 400, 500 people respond that they've, for example, seen election leaflets in their area, what they're seeing on it. This is journalism that one journalist couldn't do alone, but by getting lots of people to feed into it, you're able to get more information that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So you can tell better stories. And all of this will build trust in your journalism, the way you present yourself. And it improves the engagement with your journalism itself. People might read for longer. They might read more articles if they feel engaged or valued in the way that you're communicating with them, and that's feeding into how you're writing stories that work for them. You can help connect and build communities, and for me, it's a really important one. If you're thinking about who is the community you're serving, and it might be that you have a very broad audience, but you focus specifically on one community for a project, you can have a really important role as a publisher to actually build connections, sometimes heal parts of community connections. And through defining a community or reinforcing a definition of it, you're helping that community to define itself. Of course, this supports reader revenue streams. So engagement is a methodology within these that I've mentioned already. And there's another one, kind of like a values-based decision as well, because I think it's important people should have a say in journalism or how their communities are covered. So I think there's a kind of a sense of a responsibility that we have as publishers to communities to enable them to engage in the stories that are being told about where they live. And I think there are a couple purposes and principles to build on these. So what you're trying to do is, or that you can achieve, is rebuild trust. You should put communities and people at the center of your reporting and your storytelling and your organizations as much as possible. You should think about your audience as an asset. They're not just a way to raise funds for your important reporting, but they have ideas and information which go well beyond the value of just financial return. That journalism is a two-way street, that the internet offers people the opportunity to reply to you in a way that a newspaper didn't. And this is the opportunity that we now need to grasp with how we do that. And of course, it brings challenges with it as well. The way I've often put it is, it's easy to publish to 10,000 people, but how do you listen to 10,000 people? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. That it really needs to be meaningful, that it shouldn't be tokenistic, that you're engaging for the sake of it. You should really be driven by an editorial or a business need or a community need when you're thinking about what kind of question you want to ask. And that you really need to work at facilitating participation. Crafting a good question isn't always as easy as you think it is. And you need to really think about and empathize with the audience or the community or the user perspective in how you're presenting or making it easy for them to engage with you. So taking a deep dive now into the Bristol Cable to see how in practice we've brought all of these things together in a newsroom. So the Bristol Cable is a community-owned cooperative newspaper and a community benefit society. So that means it is legally owned by its members, over 2,500 local people based in the UK, a city of about 500,000 people. And as a community benefit society, it has a legal obligation to serve the community need. But it was really born as a grassroots voluntary effort, driven by the sense of how can journalism be a community good and serve a community need? It was really taken as a first point of a force for community empowerment, rather than it being about journalism. The mindset was this is a part of community infrastructure and democratic infrastructure that is so important, it should be owned and led by the community. Now, almost 10 years later, it regularly publishes online. It publishes a print newspaper 4 times a year, 30,000 copies. It's completely free to access, and it's full of in-depth investigative journalism. And it also prioritizes events and community engagement as well. So that's the kind of broad mix of the approach to the cable. And the cost of it, it's independent. It's a not-for-profit funded by a mix of member contributions, about a third, grants, about 2/3, and advertising, just a small bit on top. There's no advertising on the website, it's just in the print. It's accountable, and I think this is probably one of the most radical aspects of it. It's directly accountable to the community it serves both through member revenue. So if people cancel their contributions, that's a very direct way in which they can say, we're holding you accountable for your reporting. It's a very real thing they can hold over you. But also there are democratic processes. They elect the directors of the organization. So there's about 10 directors who are members that hold the staff team accountable. And every year at the annual general meeting, members ask questions, and the organization has to stand up there and answer them. And it's democratic, so the directors vote on the annual budget on behalf of members, and each year at the annual general meeting, members steer the direction of the organization, and through asking key questions about an issue of substance or attention that's coming up for the organization and getting a feel on it. And it's for everyone. It's completely free to access. But as we say, like the NHS, it's at the point of access, but not free to produce. And that's part of the storytelling that the cable needs to do to explain why it's valuable, why it's not just to take it for granted, but it's worth supporting. And that was exactly what we set out to do. And this is the thing that when I worked at the cable, it was the mantra I had in my head when thinking about how we're engaging people, how we're involving them, how we're selling the organization, is that the mission is to create a newspaper worth supporting, that it's values driven, that it stands for something. It stands for journalism in the public interest, and it stands for truth, and it stands for sticking up for local communities that have been misrepresented or not well included. So it has a very clear identity and sense of self that people can actually attach themselves to. And I think it's interesting reflecting back on the first point of what do people need. Sometimes you can ask people what do they want, but they don't know it until you present it to them. And what you can also do is you can create something that is valuable, that people say, okay, this is actually what I want to be a part of. And this is what we try to do in the cable, is to create something that people could feel a sense of ownership over. And the democratic part of it is one part. It's not I think ultimately for some members, it really wasn't the most important thing. It was a very good way in which we could show our values and show and also be accountable to the community. But for most people, they just saw the journalism and they said, this is a good thing, I want to support it. And that's the second value, is that it's free to access and it's public interest. So making sure you're producing journalism that's having an impact. And actually, we would often see the moments of growth in the journalism would be when there's an investigation that's had an impact for the community. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a big protest bordering on a riot just downstairs from the office in the center of town. A police station was broken into in a big protest, and cars set on fire, etc. As part of protests against a new law to restrict protest. And the national reporting on this, in our view, was initially very inaccurate. And basically the police charged the protesters and started the fight, was what we saw, but others reporting that actually protesters in some way instigated the violence. And through our reporting and our documentation of what really happened, we were able to have a national impact in showing the value of on the ground local reporting and independent and journalism that tells the truth, basically. And that directly led to hundreds of new members signing up over 2 weeks. We were on the radio, we're on the national radio, we're on local radio, and we were really telling the story about what we were doing and why, and connecting it with our mission and with our membership, that this couldn't happen without your support. And I think that was a really interesting learning for us in seeing those moments, those news moments that drive people to become a member, that there's something that needs to motivate them. So it could be that you are ongoingly motivating people through your copy by saying this is valuable, this is important. But the best thing you can do is, show, don't tell. And by reporting on something that people see is really valuable, and then connecting that immediately to your value proposition, to your community that you think is worth joining, that supports the journalism, is the best thing you can do in those cases. And on top of this, regularly doing community engagement so that that's both investigative, but it's also community based. But there are always opportunities for people to get involved. And looking at the kind of the basic product of membership, it's a pay what you can model. Interestingly, that's evolving. We began with a pay what you can model because basically we didn't know what people were willing to pay for. And we wanted to make it accessible. So you could pay anything from £1 per month to become a shareholder. But we would try to encourage people to sign up for certain amounts. So on average now it's about £4 a month. We'd love people to sign up for £7 or £10 a month, but we don't want that to be exclusionary. And there are lots of approaches and good research on the best way to frame this now. And we can have standard buttons that you can click to give certain amounts, but at least this is what we began with by saying pay what you can. People get ownership, legal ownership over the organization and democratic rights. For some, that was scary actually, and they would ask us, "Oh, am I legally liable?" And I had to explain what that is. And a lot of this is in how you tell the story in a way that is compelling and resonates with what most might motivate people to become a member. So this was there, but actually we prioritize other key bits of the kind of membership offer in how we first communicate it with people. Actually, and those reasons were ones actually we would base it on why people said they joined. So as I said at the beginning, it's always important when you're testing something to be looking at how you're learning from this. And when we were selling memberships, every time someone signs up, we would ask them, why did you join today? And they were really, really, really useful for understanding the kind of the emotional motivation that led people to become a member, because often it would be that much more than a kind of you get access to a product or a service, but there's something inside them that's motivating them. And we'd use those words, we'd reflect those words back on the kind of the join page. It's about supporting independent journalism or sticking up for people. That's really, really useful to use people's words and to understand what's motivating them to join. The other things that I've kind of already mentioned that is called to it, but I'll just go with for clarity. Members have an exclusive right to shape the direction of the organization, and that's not it's not the case that it's a free-for-all, that everyone has an equal say, but it's much more about that there are opportunities as part of the membership to have a say, but it's not for everyone to decide on everything. There was a staff team who operating with a plan, but it's more of a responsibility to go to members to get a sense of what's important to you, what are your priorities right now. It's a community that you can feel really part of something. It's a sense of belonging and ownership. I always thought was the core of the product, that you're proud to be a member, proud to support this journalism from happening. And that's much deeper than a subscription. It's much more of a sense of identity, and that they can be proud that the journalism is free to access. For many, they would say it'd be the last kind of donation that they would ever cancel. Some people called it donation, some people called it a subscription, but they said it was the last that they would ever consider canceling, because they saw such an impact. They thought it wouldn't exist if they stopped being members, and they recognize that it's there because they're members. And of course, you can also look at the tangible exclusive things, and I think it's really important to actually to build these in, because if you have a really big scale like The Guardian, and you have a global scale, you can ask for contributions, and you can survive off donations. But ultimately, people are going to ask, like, what do I get? And you can actually see this with The Guardian offering subscriptions and blending a little bit their messaging around donations and subscription, that ultimately people are motivated by getting something tangible. Or as I often would look at it from their perspective, what do they lose when they cancel? And for some people, it's okay, they risk losing the organization, but not everyone is feeling the same. And there has to be something that they feel like they're losing out on. It might be access to a community, newsletter or a forum, but I think it's important to look at the tangible things that you offer within a value proposition that's values driven. So going into a bit more depth on the value proposition, this is, I find it a really helpful way to think about the product that you're offering. I don't expect you to look at this in depth because it's probably not very big for you to read, but it's just to look at the actual canvas as a whole. It's a standard value proposition canvas. There are lots of these kind of canvases and playbooks and things that you can look at for these things, but it's a really interesting thing to do with your team. If you have a community, or if you want to define your community and you want to define a product or that you can offer around it, let's say membership or even donations, you can do this for that particular product or for your editorial as a whole. And you look at it from the user perspective, and this is kind of one key takeaway I would really encourage you to bear in mind is always think about it from the user or the audience perspective. And this forces you to do that. It forces you to go out there, to interview people, to do a survey, to really understand how your journalism or how your product, let's say membership, is actually helping them with a problem they have in their life. Is it a job to be done? Is there a particular pain they have in reading other news? For example, I'll go into this a little bit more clearly here. And what are the benefits that they're getting as well? Actually, sorry, just jumping back quickly. Yeah, how are they gaining and how are you relieving those pains from their emotional point of view to the kind of product that you're offering that addresses them. So for the cable, I saw actually, and I think these are in some not immediately intuitive when you think about journalism. You might think, okay, well, they want information. But I think it goes much more beyond that when you think about developing a community around your journalism. So I noticed through interviews and phone calls and surveys with and feedback from members over the years, one of the biggest pains in some categories of member was that they feel powerless and isolated and doing something positive about where they live. That joining a community was a way to actually address that. That they don't feel well informed, they want to be up to date. That's a pretty reliable one that you can think about in most editorial products. That's a need that you can address, and it's a good one, of course, to address. And the counterpoint also is that they're not happy with other media, that they're fed up with it. Perhaps there's a really poor user experience on their website, or just editorial that it doesn't meet their needs in some way. Perhaps it's really too long, it's not in the right format, or it's not very well written. These are kind of classic pains that I was hearing people talk about. And then building on those gains, if you think about, okay, how might we address that? How might we address that? What we did was we built a community that people could be a part of, that they're able to connect with each other. They're actually able to meet with each other. They're able to have an input as well, that they can be relevant. They can do something positive. They can feel like they have an impact where they live, and that if they feel heard and part of a conversation through the way in which we engage them. And for some people, understanding interest was sufficient, that they just want to read the journalism because they care about where they live as a local newspaper. And this is also why it's useful to define those segments or those categories or those personas of your community and how you're meeting the needs of each one and how they're differentiated, because it obviously won't be homogenous. And you can categorize it in lots of different ways about, do they have particular jobs or needs or things that they want to achieve that your editorial, your product can address. Yeah. This is one I mentioned already, so that about a third of the income for the cable is membership and the rest is grants. So obviously bearing that in mind, it wasn't the panacea, it wasn't funding everything, it did require extra funding. I'm going to go a little bit more into depth on how we engaged people at the cable. So monthly members meetings, community events, workshops and trainings, online forums, community organizing, annual general meetings, and call outs. We did a lot. I'm going to focus on call outs in particular, because I think that might be most relevant and useful for your organizations. But I'll touch on these very briefly. Being a local organization, it's really great that you can host local events, that people can turn up to them. I think events are the best way to build community, because you see people face to face, you empathize, you connect in a way that you can't online. If you have that opportunity open to you, that's fantastic. And there are lots of ways you can present things. So our monthly members meetings, we would basically have an insider behind the scenes view of our journalism. What questions do you have? How it was made, etc. And our AGMs, highly participatory, well-facilitated events with small group discussions with particular questions or challenges for people to discuss together. We ask questions like, what kind of journalism should we prioritize? How important are these in prioritizing our spending? So what kind of things should we focus on? What kind of organization should we be? Should we push for political and policy changes, or actually is that against our sort of approach to journalism? Should we apply for a grant from Google? We had a very good conversation about what that would mean for us. What should membership mean? So that's looking a bit more about the membership offer. And there's a note there, actually, I would say it's really important when you're building and engaging a particular community around your journalism to always be thinking about who's not in the room, because you have risk reinforcing a bubble. And if you actually want to grow your community, you have to think about who's not in the room, what are their needs, and how can you bring them into it. So when you're asking your community questions, you have to bear in mind about who else you need to be asking these questions to. And then the very meta one, what kind of decisions should members be consulted on? And I found this very useful, because outcome was members said, we trust you, the staff team, to make decisions on an operational basis because we don't have the time or information to make decisions. But if there's something that changes what I support as a member, what the organization stands for, you have to consult us, or something about what membership is. So like if you stop printing the newspaper, you have to ask us. And these are kind of outcomes that you might get. You might get, a tally, a table of priorities, and you can see here this is super useful for confirming what members wanted. They wanted solutions journalism, which we weren't doing a lot at that time, and that was really, really useful for prioritizing the type of journalism. People wanted stuff that wasn't depressing. They said they wanted stuff that would address those needs that I mentioned earlier about frustration or powerlessness. They wanted to not feel like that was being reinforced. And then when you look at how you can engage people, I found this really useful. It's something I developed in thinking about how do you break down the kind of levels of engagement. So everyone has information needs, and that's basically what do they want to know about. Then most people have an opinion on topics, whether they want to or not, they might have an opinion. So it's useful to know what they think about things that they know about. Then there'll be much fewer people who have experience or expertise that they might be able to share on a certain topic. Did this happen to them? Or are they subject matter experts? So you see, it gets smaller as you go down this, but most people have needs, opinions, and then a few people have experience and expertise. And it's important to when you're asking questions to your community to think about, what am I asking here? To how many people is this relevant? And when you're targeting it, to be conscious if you're asking for particular expertise, that it might be irrelevant for most people, and that they shouldn't feel bad for not being able to answer that question. So this is what I bear in mind. Always take the user perspective in how they might receive the question. This is again something super useful for membership puzzle project when you look at why people might actually engage with you. They might want to learn something new or contribute their expertise, to have a say, be heard. They might want to learn about the organization's processes. They might want to do it because they love your organization, because they really value you and they want to give back. and because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Again, circling back, really thinking about people's motivations in when you're trying to involve them directly in something that requires them to give something of themselves. It's a big ask. And if they're being generous, I think you need to think about how you're being generous towards them as well. So yeah, better understanding your audience's needs. You can find out what your audience wants to know. You understand the priorities and feedback. And this was super useful for the cable in covering certain things like climate change and COVID. And to give like a more concrete example of call outs. So they're surveys, and it's just a kind of well-designed survey. Our approach was always to give people enough context about a particular topic. So here it's where should we focus our editorial coverage? If we're going to expand it, should we focus on community and culture reporting or just more regular news reporting? And tell us why. I'm a massive fan of free text for all of its difficulties in needing to analyze it. It's far more useful than just getting a quantitative result. But that is what you get. Here, the response that we got here was basically, can you do both? Of course. But what was important for this is the 12,000 words of feedback about how people wanted us to do it. What was important about the way we did it, and this really informed the approach to expanding the editorial coverage. And I think this is really useful for making sure your journalism is relevant for communities, for meeting their needs, particularly if you want to do something that they would say, this is so valuable, I want to support it. At the beginning of COVID, our first reaction was, well, what do people need from us right now? And so we put together a survey with a couple of proposals about what kind of coverage you want us to do. As you can see here, people generally said, do most of those things, but don't worry about the explainers. And then they gave loads of feedback about different things that they wanted us to cover. And at least for many people, it was showing that their voice mattered to you, to the newsroom, that you're thinking about them, that you care about what they need. And then for your organization, it's really useful to know, is this what people want? Is this, and from this, lots of sources, doctors, nurses came forward saying, here's what I'm seeing on the ground level. And then we talked to them and got really great stories from that. But only because we were generous in saying, and had this reputation already for being transparent and being responsible in our reporting and asking questions. A much bigger project was a citizens agenda. So that's an approach to election reporting, which is avoiding the kind of classic horse race where the agenda is set by the politicians or by by editors, and actually saying, well, let's let the citizens set the agenda. And so that's asking them very simple questions. What's most important to you? What issues are most important to you this election? And what question would you ask the candidates if you could? This was all for their mayoral election on local elections. From that, we have hundreds of responses. We were able to shape the kind of 8 key topics, and each one of these had a lot more detail. And we ended up asking these questions directly to all of the candidates, and that this did shape the local election coverage that other newsrooms were doing as well. And I would say on this, it can be very time consuming, and there's a difference between doing regular call outs, which are a bit more simple, versus doing a big project like this. This is a big editorial project and required a lot of time analyzing the responses, thinking about how we display them. So I really recognize that it needs resourcing, but it can be really useful as a kind of campaigning point to get your organization noticed for the kind of journalism that you do, the kind of values that you have, and actually doing good journalism that is useful for people, that they think is worth supporting. Opinions are great to get a quick snapshot of what people think about hot topics. It's always good to do it if there's a particular thing that people are talking about, or is it an important topic at that moment. So, for example, e-scooters were a big one 2 years ago, as they are in many European cities, and there's a lot of debate around that. And actually, a questionnaire or a call out was a great way to facilitate that conversation, that they're going beyond different opinion pieces, but to get lots of perspectives and bring them together to try and facilitate a dialogue through that that call out, through those articles. So you write an article with the kind of responses that you get, to help, at least on the local level, as we put it, help the city have conversations. And you can also do this at events. If you can organize an event, you can organize it on this kind of topic and facilitate these conversations there. But this is the easiest way to do it online. And yeah, always ask if that people are happy for you to publish the response so that you can use quotes. We use that a lot from things about people saying what questions they have about confusing topics. There are obviously ones which are really difficult to ask questions about. So I don't know, you might have heard it, but in Bristol, famously, people tore down a statue of a slave trader. And that was a very divisive topic locally. And we had to think very carefully about how to facilitate that conversation. It was a conversation we felt that needed to be had, but that we had to ask the right questions to not exacerbate the debate, but help a form of dialogue. But these were extremely well read articles that we wrote from the call outs, and I think answered a community need to have a conversation as a community about certain issues. You can find great case studies and sources by asking questions. People just say, I know that. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I know this thing. You can build a community around a certain issue. So I think a great role for media is to convene communities and connect people, as well as provide them for information. You can build up a contact list book. If you ask people for consent, you can tag them so that actually, if you are doing a story in the future about a certain topic, you think, okay, I know I've got a list of 50 doctors I can contact here right now. So you can target your communications much better in the future. And the kind of process that we used was it would come up at different stages than the reporting process. So to try and get a mindset or an understanding inside the editorial team that there is a community there that you can draw on. There's a resource that you can ask questions. And it should be something that comes up in discussions to say, oh, you could ask the members about that. You could do a call out about that. If you want to find a particular person or there's a perspective that you want to get, is there something that we could ask? We did this on a membership system that we ended up building. We've kind of open sourced it. It's called B2B now, so that others can use it to be able to ask those questions. We would test it, always get someone inside the newsroom to fill it out from a user perspective to see if the wordings make sense, if it's confusing, is it too long, etc. We publish it, distribute it. Newsletters by far the best way to get people to respond to our call outs with just a nice call to action button to click with some context. But obviously share it on social media, put it all in relevant articles on the homepage, and then at a certain point close the survey, analyze the responses, and contact relevant people and tell the story. Use this for an editorial article. And then it's really important, I think, when you've done a call out, to follow up and say, here's what we did with it, here's the article, thank you for everyone for contributing, etc. Really bearing in mind this is an ongoing relationship that you're building with the community. As a whistle-stop tour through a lot of topics, I'm very happy now. I know we don't have a huge amount of time. I'm happy to stay for as long as people would like, but I'd love to jump in and answer some of your questions and see how this might work for your newsrooms.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucas. I think that it's so inspired, yes, and I'm pretty sure that our participants can use it even in our region. Yeah, so we have some questions from the people. So I will start with Philip. Putting out the question for later, what is your advice on part free, part paywall, or subscription or membership model?
I mean, this is what I'm also really interested in from everyone here, because I think it's context dependent. And I think my example of the Bristol cable is in a city in the UK. It's one of the more wealthy countries in Europe, but also there are lots of people within the city who aren't especially wealthy. So I think it's very much context dependent and something to experiment with. I think it's important to not confuse the offer or offer too many things. Just from, if you were to look at a page and if it says do this or this or this, there shouldn't be too much friction in for people to think about what you're asking from them, or too many options. I think if you're saying it's a question about having a paywall, subscription, or membership model. The paywall is a really interesting question. I think if the tech isn't too difficult for you to implement, so you can actually have that on a paywall, it can be beneficial if that's your main product to limit access a little bit, but also to make sure that people can get a taster of it as well. So yeah, I think it's not a bad thing necessarily to restrict to some extent access to your journalism based on subscription or membership, and it's not exclusive whether it's subscription or membership whether you do that.
Thank you. Also, one more question from Philip regarding the term committed journalism. Is it different from engaged journalism?
I haven't heard the term. No, I'd love to hear more about it.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a question from Karin. What if some of the members pay their part of donation, but the total sum of money is not enough to do a story or a project? What to do in this situation?
It's obviously context dependent. If you're crowdfunding to be able to do something, I think that's actually quite a nice campaigning point, that like you need to raise a certain amount of money to actually do something. As you saw, with the cable's revenue was only ever a third of membership, and there was a lot of grant funding. And it's a question mark about whether it can be fully sustained on membership. And actually, I think grants are really important. And I think it's a useful thing to be able to go to a funder, a local funder or an industry funder, and say, we are doing good journalism, we're responsible to a community, we can't fully fund it from the community, but having this community is actually a big bonus to many potential funders, I think. So you could actually say to them, we've managed to raise a third or half of the project funding from the community, but we need your support to fill the rest. And for many, yeah, the fact that you are building a community, that you're potentially growing your revenue model, can be very compelling for them to actually offer you more support.
Thank you. And one more question. Any advice when your community is at risk and has to remain anonymous in general? Super extremely important question for our region, yes.
Yeah, no, that's a really important and interesting question. Yeah, I would as a first point think about and be conscious of, if you're collecting personal information from them, that it's through a secure process, through a secure payment platform, or that you're, if you in some way have a list, that it's as well protected as you can, and that you're clear about this as well, to give people information about how you're doing this. If it's so risky that even potentially having a list is risky for you, then probably would think about not collecting that list, because I think it's important to not obviously put people in danger, and enable them to, say if you have a Telegram channel or something, to be able to follow you, to build a community in the safest way possible, so that they can still be in touch, they can still follow you, or potentially even engage with you, but do it perhaps through encrypted channels, and really interrogate the tech that you have and whether it is secure. And yeah, ask the question always you should do is, do we need this information? Do we need to find out how old they are, their demographics? And if you do, unlink that from their profile. So you could do an anonymous survey if you want to do some research on what defines your audience. But then don't link that to profiles, because that might be personal information that you don't need to link to them necessarily.
Thank you. Maybe we also need to do a webinar regarding security issues. I think that it's like really important. I don't see any other questions. I don't know. It's like your last chance. If you want to say something, you can even do it yourself. You don't need to write something in chat. Yeah. Okay, Annika. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question, maybe not so much related to the Eastern European experience, but rather to the Western one, because in our societies, actually, we are all talking about this problem of the bubbles, the opinion bubbles, and all the polarization of the societies. Isn't this community building actually contributing to this polarization? Because you're building up a bubble of your own, of like-minded people around you, and actually they just repeat themselves, or they get always confronted with the topics they are interested in, but never confronted with any other perspective. So actually, do you think it's really a good development?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it's in some way neutral in terms of what kind of community it is. It could be a fascist community. Why not? I think it's therefore about the kind of ethos that you build into the values of your community. So for the cable, it had a very value of diversity, a value of engaging with people who aren't there. It's the value of doing community engagement beyond membership engagement. So I think to prevent reinforcing bubbles, community-based newsrooms should really think about how they're doing that and how they're avoiding that. But yeah, I think there's an inherent risk with all publishing as well, that you're reinforcing a particular mindset or bubble. And this isn't necessarily the solution to that, but it's a way of reinforcing that. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that we can finish. Yeah, thank you so much, Lucas. I mean, I totally agree that it was so in-depth and useful, and you asked like really a lot of great questions that I think our regional newsrooms should ask themselves when they are talking about community building or monetization. So thank you so much. Yes, and our next webinar will be related to media in exile. So I will also share this information with our participants of this webinar, and see you in our next webinars as a part of in-depth project. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.